So back to the question of what is deployment in data warehousing. Deployment refers to the process of making a data warehouse system available and operational for its intended users. It involves taking data warehouse from a development or testing environment and making it accessible for querying, reporting, and analysis by business users, analysts, and stakeholders. In layman's terms, deployment is just taking something to the market, right? I've built this, it's good to go, everything is finished, I'm pretty sure it's working fine. I can now sell it to my customer to use. That's what deployment means. So if your customer starts using it and it's not working, what happens? They come back to complain or write a bad review for you, right? That's how it goes. So if the system or if whatever you sold to your customer is bad, let's say it's something that could cause serious accident, right? Let's say a car, right? You sell a car to a customer and that car is broken somewhere. Maybe the wheels are not attached very well or something, right? Person goes on the highway, the wheel comes off and there's a huge crash. There is trouble for you, right? So when it comes to deployment, right? Usually in companies, they have like what we call the production system, right? So this is like the day-to-day system that the company uses for its operations, right? Where they go to see, okay, all the data that's the company's data, the finance data is there, the customer data is there, every information that the company has is there in the production system, right? The ones that they need to do reporting to the government, right? Because companies have to file reports with the government periodically, their financial reports, this and that, file their taxes, everything. So these are like the working data of the company is in the production system. And like I think that's Lalita said, these systems can be scary at first to even work in because anything you change can affect the whole company, right? So what happens is companies have put in a process and procedure for allowing changes to production systems. If your company is a global company, right? Let's say you deploy something here, it could shut off another system somewhere in China or India or in the UK, right? So because of that, before you can even deploy something to a production system, there is an approval process that it goes through. Now, it doesn't matter what you are deploying, right? It could, as far as it's IT concerned, right? IT related, there is a process and procedure for deploying things to the production system. As an ETL data warehouse developer, right? The systems we build sometimes don't break things like other systems do, right? Let's say there's a network engineer somewhere, right? And they are deploying like network interface card, right? Basically, they use those things to connect the networks. Just understand it that way. If that card wasn't configured well or something and tested well in the system, if that card breaks things, right? One is like the internal network of wherever that network card is controlling is already down. So the business won't be able to work. Before the deployment happens, right? Ideally, you will build whatever you want to deploy. In the context of data warehouse and ETL, let's assume this is not a fresh data warehouse you are deploying. Like, that would be an entire system deployment, right? Let's say you are just making changes to maybe one of the tables in data warehouse, right? Either bring in a new table or make some changes to the ETL or something like that. Something that doesn't really disrupt the entire system, okay? Now, after you have, let's assume this is an ETL, okay? After you have made the changes to the ETL, right? You run it in your working station, your workstation, your laptop or your dev environment, depending on where you made that change in, run it to make sure everything is working, right? So there is a process called, some companies call it, CRQs, like change request, right? So this change request, what it does basically is you are requesting to make a change to a production system. So the company will have like an online form, usually structured like a ticket. You know, the way you create tickets like for tasks to be done for you, it's usually structured like a ticket, right? You go in, fill in the information, right? And then, you know, you be as specific and clear as possible, right? Fill in the information. You know, the ticket will have a name and then a description of what you are going to deploy, okay? And then also the systems that will be affected by what you are deploying. Does that make sense? Are you guys with me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's say, for instance, you have different production servers, right? You have one server for your database, right? And then you have another server for your reporting, right? Let's say your server for the data warehouse and data warehouse and databases is, let's call it server A, right? And then server B is for your reports and dashboards and everything else, right? Now, because you are making changes to an ETL or data warehouse system, the system that will be affected is server A, right? So you have to tell them, okay, this is the system that will be affected by my deployment, right? And then you have to specify there how long your deployment will take. Some deployments is just to copy file from your dev environment to the production environment, and that's it. For some deployments, you need to create objects on the SQL server, right? Let's say you are deploying a new ETL process that needs to have tables created as part of that deployment, right? Both the stage tables and the main tables, right? Maybe some stored procedures need to be created as part of that. Maybe some views need to be created, right? So all these things are all what you have to describe for them, that this is what I'm going to do during this deployment process. And then for each of these, you kind of estimate how long it's going to take you based on the way you have done it in the development environment, right? Let's say the company just started to read data from Salesforce, right? So we did the test in the dev environment, everything is working fine. Now we need to deploy that system to a production environment so that now they can read data, consume data from Salesforce, and use that Salesforce data to create dashboards and reports, right? Because you didn't have Salesforce before in your production environment, Salesforce data, right? Everything has to be done from scratch. Depending on how you're reading data from Salesforce, if you're reading from API, you probably have the API script in your ETL already. If not, then you need to use dbamp, right? You have to install dbamp on the SQL server in your production environment, right? And then configure it so that it can communicate with Salesforce and you will be able to read data from Salesforce, right? And then your destination tables, your stage tables, depending on how you're reading data from Salesforce, Salesforce has like proprietary stored procedures that basically you run them you can either refresh data, you can either refresh tables or replicate tables, right? So with replicate, it will just kind of make a copy of the Salesforce table in your database. Now, refresh is more like an incremental load kind of thing. So it will basically read from Salesforce and update the tables, right? Now, Salesforce has this, like I mentioned, the proprietary stored procedures that they have. Basically, when it tries to read the data to refresh the table, if it finds out that, oh, I need to actually copy the table instead of just refreshing it, it will drop the existing table and create a new one and populate it with the data. Let's say some fields in the system have changed, right? Now, instead of going around trying to figure out which field changed, blah, 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 once there is a schema change, right, it goes from refresh to replicate. So there's already a logic in that stop procedure that will now tell it, okay, if this is like this, go to, I taught you guys, all this control of flow in SQL, right? And I think I showed examples earlier of how you can, use labels to create like markers in your procedure where you can tell it, okay, go to this place or go to this place or go to this place, right? So once it figures out that I need to replicate, it will now direct it to go to that replicate section, or rather to call to go to a section within the procedure where it now calls the stop procedure that takes care of the replicate function. All these things you need to do in terms of the deployment is gather everything that you need to do as part of that, because once you deploy it, it means that the system, whatever you prepared, is ready to go, verified and tested, and ready to be used by your end user, right? So whatever you need to have in place to make sure that whatever you are deploying is ready to be used by the end user has to be in that your deployment process, has to be part of that your deployment process, all right? Whether it's ETLs, you need to create tables, you need to grant permissions to people, and stuff like that. Now, depending on your level of permission on the systems you're working on, you might need other people to, be part of that deployment. Let's say you don't have administrator access on the database. You might need someone with administrator access to do some of these things for you, like creating objects on the database and stuff like that, right? So once you fill in everything that you need to fill in that form, the systems that will be affected, what exactly you are going to do, how long it's going to take you, contingency plans in case something goes wrong, what are you going to do? Remember, you are pushing things to a production system. And if something goes wrong, the production system cannot be shut down. Rather, you roll back the change that caused that something to go down, right? You roll it back. And part of rolling it back is whatever you did as part of the deployment, you undo it. So there has to be a contingency plan in case something goes wrong, right? And part of the contingency plan, you have to estimate how long it's going to take you to roll it back. In fact, in my former company, they will ask you, okay, have you tested this in a lower environment? If you say no, obviously, you cannot proceed with the deployment. So you must have tested this in a lower environment. By lower, I mean either a test environment or a dev environment, right? And then they will ask you, in case something goes wrong, how long will it take you to roll back this deployment? They will give you options, less than an hour, less than 2 hours, stuff like that. You pick one, right? Already we have talked about what systems will be affected by your deployment. Sometimes deployments will affect more than one system. By system, I mean server, right? Sometimes deployment might affect more than one server, depending on what you are deploying and how the organization is set up. Okay? It might affect more than one server. So you put all those things down, and then after the deployment itself, right? Let's say you have deployed your ETL package or whatever, then there is a monitoring period, right? Where basically you just sit and wait to see if anything goes wrong. Does that make sense? If anything goes wrong, then it's time to roll back. For everything I've done, I mean, with our, like I said, with our kind of deployments, things don't really go wrong. There are other systems that could go wrong, like if you're, maybe creating VMs or stuff. I mean, there are other things that are more like, critical in terms of deployments that maybe can shut an entire system down. But as a data warehouse ETL developer, you don't really go deep into those things, unless obviously that the server itself went down, right? That could happen with deployments. And one thing I failed to mention is, usually with deployments, right, most companies will not allow you to do deployments during active business hours. Why is that? Because they want minimal disruption to the business day, right? So in my former company, basically we do deployment after close of business, like beyond 5 p.m., right? That is when you do your deployment. So you get all the necessary approvals, and then you start the deployment after. So in that form that you fill, you also put in the time the deployment will start, how long it's going to take, and when it will end, okay? So after you fill that form, basically you submit it, right? Someone from your team, your manager, will go through it, okay? Make sure everything is fine, and then approve, okay? After that approval, there's usually a meeting that you have to go to. So this meeting holds every day, Monday to Thursday. They don't hold on Fridays because they don't want deployment on Fridays. Why? Because Friday is more or less weekend, right? If something goes wrong on Friday, there might be nobody to fix it over the weekend. So they basically don't allow deployment on Fridays. So you can do deployment any day from Monday to Thursday, but once it's Friday, no deployment is allowed. They won't even approve. I mean, there's no meeting to approve the deployment, okay? It's not allowed. So after you have that, you go to the meeting. The meeting is usually like daily. It could vary depending on the company. And when you go there, you basically explain to them, they will pull up the form that you filled, right? And then you explain to them what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? Usually, all they care about is, will something go wrong with this deployment? Can it break something, right? If it's going to break something, they will now focus on, okay, how do we make sure that the damage is minimal? What's rollback plans that we have? But like I said, for the system that we work with, there is really not much of interruption to the system itself. So once you get approved, the first step is done. Now you have all the approvals you need to get your deployment started. Okay? All you're now doing is waiting for the time to start the deployment. When it gets to that time to start the deployment, you now have to log into the system to have the final approval to actually start the deployment. You already have permission to deploy. It has been approved. Your deployment has been approved. But before you even start it, they have to give you the green light to start the deployment. Does that make sense? So there is someone there 24 hours in my former company, because it's a global company. We have like, people all over the world. So there is somebody somewhere at any point of the day to authorize the start of your deployment. Once they give you that go ahead to start your deployment, so basically you give them your ticket number, your CRQ number, and then ask for permission to start your deployment. Once they grant that permission, basically all they do is go look at your form, make sure that everything is approved, and then they say, okay, go ahead and start your deployment. Then you go and start doing what you have to do, right? After that, there is like a flow chart where you have to check off what you have done already. Once you have done deploying, you now tell them, okay, deployment is done, is now monitoring in session, right? You click on that. Over there, we had like 30 minutes monitoring. post-deployment. So after you deploy, you monitor your deployed process for 30 minutes. Within that 30 minutes, you just make sure everything is working fine. If anything goes wrong, that's when you roll back, right? Whatever is causing the damage. In fact, you can roll down the entire deployment. You can roll back the entire deployment, right? Or you can even cancel. Let's say you got the approval, right? But somewhere along the line, something happened. You couldn't meet up with the time to start the deployment. You can cancel it and then start the whole process again of approval again to do that deployment on another day. Usually, they take these deployments very seriously because you're working in production systems, and that can impact a lot of things, right? Some of the different things that you can do as part of it, some of the different things that can be deployed as a data warehouse developer, right? It could be a configuration setting, right? It could be that you're loading data, maybe loading new data or bringing in additional ways to load data. It could be that your schema design is being updated. It could be you're doing some form of performance tuning, right? It could be some form of security stuff you're working with. It could be anything basically. That's any change that needs to be done in production environment that requires deployment. We need to go through those kind of approval processes to make sure that everything is fine and that the system is not broken and everybody is happy at the end. All right, folks. That's all I have for tonight. Do you guys have any questions for me on anything before I go?
So next week you will be here, Tony? Next Monday?
No, I do this once a month.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Were you guys able to fill in the survey?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I did too.
Not sure why few people showed up today. I think they don't understand deployments or they think they know it, but yeah. So
Tony, rollback is a different procedure. Like, is it a different, like deploying is different procedure, right? Like that rollback is also different, or it's somewhere in the deployment area itself?
well, in our context of data warehouse and this, like rolling back means just undoing what you did, right?
Yes.
Let's say you updated a stop procedure, for instance, right? Let's say you have a stop procedure that is doing something and then you updated that procedure and things started breaking. You basically, to roll it back, right? You just remove the update that you made to that procedure. You can comment it out or something. Let's say in the procedure, there's just a simple select statement, right? And then maybe you are pulling in an additional table, and that table, for some reason, I mean, these are things you should have done before deploying it, but let's say you put in an additional table by a join, and your numbers are not adding up anymore, right? To roll it back, you remove the join you made to that additional table, right?
Oh, okay.
And you retain the original one. Or let's say you brought in additional data using a union or union all, right? If it's messing things up, you just comment out that union all until you figure out what is going on, right? So it depends on what change that you are deploying. The rollback could be different, right?
Okay.
And then with deployment, let's say you are deploying an ETL package, right? You guys know there is a file system deployment and there is SSIS catalog deployment, right? Have you guys dealt with file system deployment?
Not me.
Okay. But you have at least done some part of SSIS catalog deployment. Like your ETLs that you deployed in the bootcamp was deployed to the catalog. And I think that was the only deployment you guys did, right?
That's the only deployment that we did. Yeah.
So with catalog deployment, right? Okay, let me ask this question. When you deploy to an SSIS catalog, where does the package go? Remember, right? With deployment, you are like literally taking something from one place and putting it in another place. That is the whole thing of deployment, right? So when you deploy an ETL package, right, you are now moving it from your Visual Studio in this particular server, could be your laptop, could be your dev server. You're now moving it to the SQL server in your production environment. In that SQL server, that ETL package is located somewhere on that server, right? Where is it located when you deploy it? Because once you deploy that ETL, you can now create a job to execute the ETL on the server. So that job has to find the ETL to execute. It will not be going to look for that ETL in your dev environment or in your laptop to execute it, right? So that ETL that you deployed has to be resident on the server itself, either on the SQL server or on the machine that like the Windows server, whatever server you're using, so you can find it and run that ETL. So we're talking of SSIS catalog deployment. So when you deploy your ETL to SSIS catalog, right? Does anybody remember where it is stored? That ETL is stored. This is actually an interview question. So this is stored in SSIS DB. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yes. Forgotten, yeah.
It is stored in SSIS, sorry, yeah, SSIS, I think it's called SSDB or SSISDB, one of those two. But that's where it is stored, all right? And you can then go there and like when you're creating the job to run that, so you go here, you see the SSIS DB, okay? Now, this is a project I deployed, right? Inside the project, there's nothing there, but it will have like you can expand like it can expand it to see the actual ETLs in the project itself, right? So this will be where under this folder you will have the ETL packages, right? You can, in principle, right-click on the ETL and download it. Like basically, when you deploy it, right, the ETL is now stored here. So the one that is stored in this folder is a copy of what you have in the environment from which you deployed it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now, if you can go ahead and make a change to the one in the environment from where you deployed, it's not going to affect this one. Any change you made on that one in your workstation, if you want it to be shown in production, you need to deploy it, right? And then one of the things that people have always struggled with is version control, right? Okay, I want to make a change to something, to the ETL in production, right? Okay, I need to make sure I'm making a change to the one in production and not a copy of it that is like 3 years old, because that copy that is 3 years old, maybe there have been some changes that have been made. So you have to grab the latest copy of the package that you are making changes to. Does that make sense? So where do you find that latest copy of the ETL? Now, I'm assuming now that there is no, version control, right? But most companies will have a version control where you use either a TFS or Git or there's this other one I used earlier, SVN. If there is that version control, and assuming the version control is being maintained very well, which means it has always the latest copy committed to that version control. Because sometimes when people do deployment, they also forget to commit the copy or the latest version to the version control. Assuming you have the version control, you have Git or SVN or TFS or whatever, right? But you are still not convinced that the latest version is there, you can always come back to the SSIS catalog and grab the version that you want, or rather grab the production version and now download it and take it to your dev environment, make the changes, and now deploy it back. Does that make sense?
Okay, Tony. So
Yes.
this is what I'm trying to understand. So because we did the only deployment, the catalog deployment one time, but we didn't do like updating the production, like adding new tables or adding new fields. In this case, if we need to update the production, so to have to redeploy everything after work on the dev environment and test it and everything, and then have to redeploy everything as in the production, or just individual, like this table. Let's say I'm just trying to update the couple fields, or trying to update, let's say, a table.
If you made some update to an individual ETL package, right?
Yes.
Then you are deploying only that ETL package that you made a change to. Let's say in the ETL project, you have like 5 ETL packages, right? In that one project.
Right.
So, and you only need to make a change to one of the ETL packages.
Right.
So after you make that change, you only deploy that specific ETL package where the change was made. You don't need to deploy everything else because they're already there in production. Nothing changed, right? Does that make sense? So basically, that project deployment is like a one-time deployment. You do it and the project is already there in production, right?
Yes.
Then after you do that project deployment, right, just to move the project to production, you don't need to do project deployment again unless you have major changes to the project itself. Other than that, when you make a change to 1 or 2 individual ETLs in the project, you just deploy those into production.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
And then let's talk of file system deployment. Okay. So with file system,
I have another question before you go there.
Okay.
So, and like a productions environment, so it's usually, it's supposed to have like a backup in case if something happens, or we should, like, some companies, they don't have, like, they don't have backup for environment, for production environments.
When you say backup, what do you mean? Because
Like,
backup could be anything.
let's say something happened.
Are you saying backup of the ETL, backup of the database? Like, what backup are you talking about?
Like the production environment, like, let's say for the production environment. So let's say we did update something, and then we updated the production, and then something went wrong. So in this case, you said only rollback, but if the system crashed, let's say, for example, so usually they're supposed to have like a backup for the entire production.
Let me explain something. I think I understand where you are kind of getting confused. Okay. You have let's say your laptop, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Your laptop, let's take it as your server. Okay.
Okay.
On that server, you install software. You install your Microsoft SQL Server, your SSRS, your SSIS, and everything, right? Now, the server itself is the production server, right?
Yes.
Sometimes there is a backup server, right? When I say backup server, it means that, let's say this production server got hit by an attack,
Okay, that's exactly what I mean. Yes.
Yeah. If the production server itself got hit by an attack, you guys have to get the backup server up and running immediately. And most of the times, right, there is some kind of synchronization between the backup production server and the production server itself, so that there is minimum amount of things to do to get that server to basically take the place of the one that got hit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I have seen that before happen to us. Honestly, we have to spring up the backup server like real fast because the main production server got hit by, I think that was ransomware or something. We couldn't do anything.
All right. That's actually what I mean, actually.
Okay. So your deployment will most likely not cause that kind of failure. All right. Your deployment will most likely not cause like server level failure. Okay.
Okay.
What your deployment might cause is program level failure, like, maybe database or SQL Server or something, For that one, we don't need the backup server. Sometimes you can deploy something, it could, shut down the SQL Server service or something, or you might need to pull the backup of the database itself, right? So the way we had this set up is, right, at the server level, right, we have the production server, and then we have the backup production server, right?
Okay.
And like I said, the two have to mirror each other, because once the main server goes down, the backup has to kick in, right?
Right.
There's a way of setting that up, And then at the database level, we also have like the full backup that we do every weekend. And then we have the incremental backup that we do every day. And those backup files, we maintain a backup of the backup files on the backup server. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So the production server itself, we back up the database and save those files on the production server itself. And then we make a copy of those backup files and move them to the backup server. Why is that? Because if something happens to the production server, we need those backup files to bring the system up to date. Remember, on the backup server, you don't want to be, you have the system as close to ready as possible, right? But you don't want to be running ETLs on both servers, right? So
Right.
your most current data will be on your main production data server, right? And then copies of the backup will need to be also resident on the backup server, so that if something happens to the production server, you can restore those backup files to the SQL server on your backup server, and your system is up and running. That's why I said, the backup server has to be
matching.
Yeah, ready to go if anything happens to the production server itself. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right, folks. Thank you for coming to today's session. Just keep pushing it, working hard. Dreams do come true. I spent about, I think that was roughly 1 year I spent in the program, and I got placed. Been in the field ever since then. I'm on my second job now, so the money is good, I will not lie. So way better than what I was making before. So thank God for everything. One thing I like about this field is, the jobs are there. You apply, you get it. Sometimes you on your own, they will find you, and you interview with them, and then they give you the job. Like this second job I'm working right now, I was on my own, they found me. I didn't really apply for it. The recruiters contacted me, I went through the whole process, and then they hired me.
Okay.
I still get contacted day by day. There are some fields you will be in, you will apply, you won't hear anything. That is not this field, right? There's
Yes.
always something. Once your skills are up to date, once you have things under your belt, you will always get something. The hard part is getting your foot in the door. But once you are there, you will always have a job. I mean, there
Mhm.
could be periods of break, maybe 2 months, 3 months, or something, depending on your situation. But on the longer run, you will always have a job. There are fields that once you lose what you have, getting something even close to what you have is really difficult. You know, my initial training is as a chemist, right? So I did, research and development and stuff like that. And when I lost my job at a startup company, I couldn't get anything else.
Mm.
I couldn't get anything else. I'm like, okay, I gotta survive somehow, right? I need to find something that if I lose what I have, I can get something similar to what I had instead of having to go way lower because I'm either overqualified or the skills I have are not the ones they need or blah, blah, blah. And, some of these fields are location specific. With this field, there's nothing like location, right? It could be remote, it could be hybrid, it could be on-site, but, you can work literally anywhere, any field, any industry, you can work there. So that gives you leaves the whole world as a marketplace for you. So guys, keep pushing it, keep
Yeah.
working hard, don't
One
give
day
up.
we'll be there.
No matter how long it takes you, keep pushing it. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a good night, folks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.